Yo, what up, Toshi here. Today, we're going to be talking about Aventurine. Now, this is the 2.1 character I'll be rolling for in my account. I mentioned this in the Should You Pull video, and I mentioned this in previous videos. The reason why is because we finally have the last support we need, or last defensive option we needed for the elation or follow-up playstyle. And this is a very important playstyle because unlike the other playstyles in the game, the recent changes to the team comp we've received is Dr. Ratio. And aside from that, that team comp still feels incomplete. So finally having the last puzzle piece to the team means that it will now be fully fleshed out and be competitive to all the other playstyles in the game like Dot, Hyper Carry, although Hyper Carry isn't necessarily a playstyle, Mono Quantum, and so on and so forth. I think the other one is, no, I think that is the other two playstyles in this game. Anyways, let's hop into today's video. Yo, what up, Toshi here. So I finally got around to building Dr. Ratio somewhat. I still am working on the talents and I still am working on the character's relics, because as you know, he's a crit character, but the saving grace about Dr. Ratio is that he does receive crit rate and crit damage for free, and the follow-ups, or not necessarily the follow-up set, you don't have to use that set, but the set in the newest Pentagon region, right, allows the character to get even more crit and crit damage, and will now be receiving planar set. The new Pentagon planar set will allow characters like Dr. Ratio to have even more crit, which means he'll be one of the easiest characters in the game to build. So therefore, anyone looking to invest into the elation playstyle, just know Dr. Ratio is one of the easiest characters to build as the core damage dealer of that team composition. And he's even more flexible when you have light cones like Only Silence Remains, giving you a huge attack increase and even more crit rate when you want to use the character in those ideal scenarios, right? 2 or fewer enemies on the field. Now, this won't always be the case, but a very nice example is the Sam battle, which usually is 2 enemies on the field at most of the fight. I did say that Dr. Ratio was the core of the team composition, but let's keep it real. Without Topaz and Numby, you're not really going to do much with the elation. You might as well just call it a hyper carry team. The reason why it's elation is because you're pushing up the action forward of Numby, which Numby then goes in and does the follow-up attack. Now, what I do like about Topaz compared to other characters, right? You can use Jing in elation playstyle, which we'll talk about in a second. This character, once CC'd, is still able to push up the action forward of Numby, no matter if it's allies, and Numby will proceed to do the attack in the given action of the, character entity. Now, unfortunately, Topaz hasn't had a rerun, right? We thought she was going to have a rerun this patch alongside Aventurine, which would have made the most sense. But on her rerun, I suggest you do picking up this light cone because it allows Topaz to deal even more damage and buff up the damage of not only Topaz, but Dr. Ratio, Jing, and now the newest character to the elation of follow-up team, Aventurine. This is going to be a very nice light cone for everybody in the team comp because everybody will be doing damage alongside each other. This is like we talked about in the Mono Quantum video. Everyone contributing to the overall team damage, which is even more, I would say, eccentric in the follow-up team because everybody is doing damage every single turn. Whereas in the Mono Quantum team, that's not necessarily the case because Fu Xuan isn't doing, damage every single turn. She does damage with the ultimate basic attack, all that jazz. Silverwolf does damage, right, every single turn. But, Sparkle isn't doing damage. And then, like, if you're using a double defensive option setup like Lynx, you're not doing damage every turn too, right? And then last but not least, having the Eidolon 1 for Topaz allows you to deal even more damage to those enemies that has that proof of depth debuff. And therefore, this means that she's able to now be a character you can slot in with Dr. Ratio without having any other character that needs to put debuffs on the enemy. Now, the thing is about Aventurine, I have to look into this, so correct me if I'm wrong. Aventurine does give a debuff on the enemy that you deal more damage to those enemies, right? With his ultimate, I believe. Correct me if I am wrong. I do believe this was pretty crappy and shitty by Hoyoverse, though, to make Eidolon 1, S1, Topaz, right? Best in slot light cone, a best in slot character alongside Dr. Ratio as being the sole character you need to use in order for Dr. Ratio to get the follow-up attacks every single turn. That was really crappy by them. I don't think they should do this with future characters, but they probably will because it worked. Now, for me personally, when it comes to the elation playstyle, there is 2 things you take into consideration. Most of the playstyle, aside from Aventurine and Jing, is mostly contributing to single target damage against the enemies. In most scenarios, you'll find this team to not be that good unless you are using a character to help with the AoE. That's why I find Jing to be the best of both worlds, and I find him to be a very solid character to use alongside Topaz, even though he only has 1 follow-up attack every single cycle. Jing is just so good for AoE scenarios, especially if those enemies are weak to lightning. He does a ton of damage, benefits from all of those buffs that Topaz does provide, the crit damage, right? The follow-up attack boosting damage, and he will benefit from Aventurine increasing the damage as well for him and Lightning Lord. He'll deal a ton of damage and help with killing out the smaller enemies so that Topaz and him and Aventurine can all focus on the little enemies, right? That has that proof of depth debuff. I think that's very important to take into consideration. And once we do receive more follow-up characters, right, because this is a solidified playstyle, hopefully those characters do have AoE just like Jing, to help contribute with that, but of different elements. Like expect a quantum follow-up attack character aside from Zui. Yeah, I never thought about using Himiko, but she can be very solid too in the same team, assuming that there are just enemies weak to fire. And there is a few scenarios in the game like that. It's just not recently where we had many enemies weak to fire, but whenever there is a lot of enemies weak to fire and it is AoE scenarios, this will be the best bet of being the character you use instead of using a character like Jing, for instance. Himiko does have more consistent follow-up attacks, assuming that there is a lot of enemies on the field that are weak to fire, and of course the amount of Eidolons you have on your Himiko, how many 50-50s you have lost at this point, or how much of a Himiko fan you are. So for the longest time, you have been using Huohuo most likely as your defensive option in the team party, or Fu Xuan depending on if you use Jing in the team party or not. And the reason why Huohuo has been so good is because she gives attack and energy, but she isn't a must-use for the team party. I'm going to explain to you why. I did touch on this in the previous videos. We talked about the should you pull, right, for Aventurine or Akhenon mostly, and I said that Huohuo was a character that gives energy to a team that doesn't really need the energy. See, the follow-up team is mostly centered around doing attacks from, backloaded damage. Well, most of the backloaded damage from those characters is not with their ultimate. Their ultimate is a small portion of their kit. Like Topaz, for instance, she deals more damage when in the enhanced state with Numby, but she's not dependent on it as much as other characters are dependent on their ultimate. Like, for instance, Seal being dependent on her ultimate to deal as much damage as she can, because that's where most of her multipliers lie. Most of the multipliers for characters like Jing, Topaz, and Aventurine is going to be centered around their follow-up attacks, which Huohuo doesn't really give much value other than attack percentage. And with Aventurine now, you're giving more crit damage and you have a follow-up attack additionally. So it's just going to be better because it gives more action forward to Numby, which is better overall. And once we do receive that Harmony character, which we'll talk about in a future video, spoiler, probably going to be Robin. Robin gives a ton of value with the action forward, I assume, which is a lot more valuable than giving energy to a team that doesn't need energy, but can benefit from having more turns to push the action forward of Numby more consistently, Aventurine more consistently, and just deal more damage because you are benefiting from taking more turns and just dealing more damage with your backloaded damage. I'm explaining this in a weird way, but I'm trying to make sense out of something that should make sense the way I probably am explaining it horribly though, but for those of you that do understand what I'm saying, that's how the elation playstyle works basically in a nutshell. We did talk about this before, but Aventurine is just way better than Jeopard just across the board, because not only does Aventurine have easy ways of resisting everything, right? Every crowd control thrown at him compared to Jeopard, who can be built with effect resistance. It does have some traces, Eidolons to help with effect resistance, but you can still be debuffed on the character. Now, debuff Jeopard isn't a good Jeopard, but Jeopard does revive, which is very nice. Him reviving and coming back from the dead with an additional shield is very nice for the team, and his shield is still really strong. It's not refreshable like Aventurine unless Jeopard does die and have his shield upon dying, right? But aside from that, Aventurine is just going to be better for the team because he just gives a lot of value. And again, since a lot of the teammates are going to be moving fast, you're going to be able to refresh the shield that Aventurine does put onto the team. If your allies are too much faster than Jeopard, you're not able to consistently refresh this shield just like you would with Aventurine. Even though the shield does last for 3 turns, there has been times where I've used characters like Seal alongside Jeopard and he hasn't been able to keep up with shielding. But that is Seal. She's like an exception to the rule here, and she's not even a part of the elation playstyle. And I did mention Fu Xuan being able to contribute to the overall team damage from Mono Quantum, and that's one of the better things about her in the team comp. You're able to dish out quite a bit of damage for ultimate, right? Depending on how much investment you have into the DPS-oriented build or sub-DPS hybrid defensive option build for Fu Xuan, you're able to contribute quite a bit, while already giving that needed crit rate, crit damage if you have Eidolons for the character, right? Her light cone damage on top of that, and just giving a lot of value as being the defensive option with the skill point management, all that jazz. Well, yeah, Aventurine be able to do that for the elation playstyle, but even more of a tailor-made support for that team is going to feel a lot better, because he is the best example that we have currently of a tailor-made defensive option for a team comp. Part of the reason why Luocha isn't going to be a character that stands the test of time compared to other defensive options. Because yes, Luocha is very universal, which can be a benefit to the character, but a lot of people have quicker clear times with other characters that do more for those teams versus Luocha, which again, for a lot of players, that is a huge deal, and for some players, you probably don't care. So there you have it. That was the easiest way for me to explain Aventurine and his value in the elation playstyle, while also giving my 2 cents on the playstyle overall and how it functions or how it's going to come together with the release of Aventurine. He is a very strong character with a team comp that is pretty strong already. I mean, especially in those scenarios where you need a lot of single target damage be dished out against one enemy with Doctor Ratio, or you find yourself in an AoE scenario with Jing, the team is really strong. Now, Aventurine does have AoE with his follow-up attack, which is a benefit of the character. So in those scenarios, you find yourself using Jing alongside Topaz, well, Aventurine will be even better. But against enemies that are weak to Imaginary alongside Dr. Ratio, Aventurine will also shine there too. So him being literally tailor-made for a team comp like this is the best case scenario for a defensive option. I think having a super niche character like him is very appreciated in Honkai Star Rail versus having, again, Luocha is just so universal and doesn't really excel in particularly any team. I mean, the only team you can think of is Daniel and Baby 209, but with Sparkle, the skill points he does contribute isn't as valuable as it used to be. Depending on, of course, the amount of investment you have into your Daniel, things can change, right? Thank you for watching and have a nice rest of your day. Peace.